Welcome to Stallside Podcast.
Today's a great day.
Today's a great day. Why is today an even more great day than
I'm excited because my friend and mentor, Dr. Scott Pierce, is in the studio with us today. I've been looking forward to this one. It's going to be a lot of fun. He's a great guy, and he's really put my career on track, and he was one of the founders of Rood Riddle. So interested to have him in the show, excited about it, and looking forward to having him here.
Yeah, you're right. He's here from the early days of the practice, and I'm sure what he's done within the practice has changed as time has gone by, and he's had more than the occasional intern, actually, where he's formed their career.
Yeah, he has. He's there's a lot of us that are still in this practice that have been influenced by him throughout the years and still today.
Yeah, and he's sort of one of those quiet toilers in that he's done a lot of work on upper airways in horses and done some really interesting things, looked at the airway differently than other people have, and has come up with some really useful information when it comes to what upper airway function means for this horse as an athlete.
Yep, been great not only for the veterinary industry, but also for the equine industry, the thoroughbred industry in general. So he's made a real impact, and excited to have him in.
Okay, well, we'll keep your excitement rolling. We'll get him in here.
Let's get him in.
Welcome to Stallside. Coming up now, Dr. Scott Pierce. Scott, welcome to Stallside.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yep, we've been looking forward to having you on for a while, and I'm particularly excited about this
Great.
one.
Thanks, Bart. I'm looking forward to it, too, and thanks for the invitation to talk. We'll hopefully have an interesting discussion.
We will.
Tell us a bit about yourself.
Oh, in 5 minutes?
Yeah. Shouldn't take too long.
No, it shouldn't.
He hasn't done much with his career.
Obviously, won't take very long. Actually, I'm an outlier. If you look back at my history, it's I'm from rural Missouri, a town of about 5,000. Rural, meaning cattle, very few horses, and the horses that were there, you didn't want to work on them because they were a bit fractious, to say the least. My dad was a veterinarian, practiced there for 47 years. I knew early on that that's the career choice I wanted to make, although I tried to talk myself out of it periodically through growing up, going through college. He was your James Herriot type veterinarian, but he didn't like horses. In fact, he was afraid of horses, and rightly so there. I knew early on that I was going to be a veterinarian. I went to University of Missouri, stayed there locally because I thought I wanted to be a farmer. And my dad said, because he had 3 farms, my dad said, no, you're not going to be a farmer. I go, well, okay, I guess I'll be a veterinarian. So I got into school, and I messed around in pre-law and, all that stuff, political science, history. I love history. But I got to Russian history, and in a master's level class of Russian history, and I go, no, I'm done with history. So then I made a full veer to the right again and decided to go back and do vet medicine, which honestly, a lot of that put me behind a little bit. So I went to undergrad at my local school, Northwest Missouri State, who's phenomenal in athletics. They've won numerous Division II football titles and basketball titles, none of which when I was there. But then I applied to the University of Missouri, where my dad attended. One of the, he was in the 4th class that graduated from UMC. Started there. I was my first year. This was interesting, and don't recommend this for everyone. My first year, I was an alternate. They didn't let me in. Didn't make the cut. I was like 3 or 4 positions away, and the only way I was going to get in is if 3 or 4 people dropped. Well, nobody dropped. I spent that year, the entire year. I was done with school because I had so many hours. I spent that entire year working construction. So you can imagine how brain dead I was getting into vet school. So I got into vet school. Then that second application, I was allowed in, accepted, and it was for an old country boy, not overly intelligent. Pretty shocking the first year vet school. It was a big stress on me, a big challenge, but I made it through. And then the second year was, of course, you guys know this, that you kind of get used to the bombardment. Second year was much better. I really was kind of leaning. I knew I didn't want to do cattle, which was the primary practice of my father. But I enjoyed being outside. But I was leaning towards small animal at the time, my second year. And mainly because I'd never been introduced to horses in equine practice. So my second year in vet school on a preceptorship, I went to Hot Springs, Arkansas, to a practice that was a breed, much like a small scale Kentucky, was a breeding operation. A lot of thoroughbred farms, breeding farms, and of course Oaklawn Park's there, the racetrack. So I remember, like it was yesterday, went with Dr. Whitaker to the racetrack. He was the track vet, and I remember standing by the first turn during a race, and I heard the horses gallop by, and I go, that was my epiphany. I go, this is it. And the rest is history, basically. That's when I totally focused on equine. I was a equine junkie. I wanted to learn. I read and studied and anything and everything about horses. I was fortunate in that I didn't have a lot of horsemanship skills. As I went on, they offered me my first job out of vet school. So I went to Hot Springs, Arkansas for a year. That was in 83. I got out of school, went there for my first year, and I was fortunate to be around Dr. Clement. Jesse Clement was a good friend of mine, but he was and still was probably one in my professional life, one of my most important mentors. He taught me mares. He taught me how to handle horses, how to not get hurt, being in the right spot at the right time. So I was blessed to have him in my young career at that point. And when I see him at the AEPs now, I still give him credit in the crowd that he was probably the biggest influence and the reason I'm here today. Went back to vet school after the sophomore until junior, senior year, totally focused on equine. Hadn't made my choice then. So got to Hot Springs, was loving it. Unfortunately, they had a small animal clinic there too. And I wasn't too bad at small animal practice. I did a lot of surgeries and stuff. But you could tell the economy was turning there in Hot Springs a little bit. And so the horse farms were struggling a little bit. So you knew the future of my professional skills down there were going to be small animal, and that was unacceptable. So I left that practice in December, right after Christmas. And Tom Lenz, an ex-AEP president, was leaving Kansas City area. And so an opening was opened there, a position opened there, and that practice in Lee Summit. So that second year, I spent in a primarily urban show horse type practice. And the only thoroughbreds were mainly, show horses, Venertus, et cetera, a lot of Arabians. So that was my second year in practice, which that was extremely beneficial practice too, because I got to do a lot of lamenesses, a lot of the most renowned things, which you don't know this around here, but back there it was wire cuts in horses and a lot of heel bulb lacerations. I became a heel bulb laceration specialist. But a lot of good memories there. Well, lo and behold, in 1984, I go to Dallas to the AEP. I'm not looking for a job. I'm pretty happy. And in fact, I'm pretty happy there in Kansas City. That's near my hometown. Nice horses, nice people, really settled in pretty good. And before that, being an equine enthusiast and knowing that, I had some big goals in my life, I said, okay, I checked the states that had reciprocity with Kentucky, because I said, wow, because those agreements might not stay in place forever. So I'm going to go to a few states and just get licensed in those states. And Kentucky, of course, was on that short list, although I'd never been to Kentucky yet. I don't know if I'd ever traveled to Kentucky. I certainly hadn't been to Lexington. So this was on my radar screen, and I'd actually signed up for it amongst some other states. So I go to the AEP in Dallas, and there wasn't a career placement center at that point. It was all on the bulletin board. Remember? I mean, you guys probably remember that. And so I remember I was already scheduled to come the next week to Kentucky, all right, to sit for that reciprocity oral interview. So I saw on the bulletin board, Central Kentucky veterinarian looking for associate. Could barely read the terrible writing. It was just like terrible.
3x5 card, I guess.
No, it was on a torn piece. It was a half torn piece of legal pad. I mean, it was very tacky. But, and so if everybody knows Dr. Bill Rood, his penmanship is terrible. So that was who wrote the little thing on the bulletin board. So I called the room, and we set up a time for an interview. And honestly, my thinking was, okay, I'm going to Kentucky. What better way to get a tour, see some horse farms, than to go talk to a vet and they can show me around. That was the reason I called. Well, lo and behold, I went up to his room one evening, and I think I was like the 23rd interview he had given. And we just clicked. We clicked. And I was coming next week. I met Tom Riddle. We all hit it off pretty good. It was mostly ambulatory. And now I look back, I know why they hired me. They got tired of tube worming horses, and that's what I did. So it was really, the planets kind of lined up, because it wasn't a hard attempt to find a job, looking for a job. I really wasn't looking. And that's in life in general. That's how a lot of good things happen. They just happen. But we came over, and if I recall, they offered me a job before I even left. I go, whoa, I've got to think about this. And that was the middle of December, and I had a U-Haul packed, ready to come over here. I've moved over here like right after Christmas. A bit naive, obviously. I've told others this story, but one thing admirable about Dr. Rood and Bill is his word. His word is good. And we didn't even talk about money. We didn't do a contract. We didn't do anything. Shook his hand, said, I'll be fair. Here I am. And he was right. He was. So the rest is Rood Riddle history.
And I've heard you say that tube dewormer is the greatest innovation in veterinary medicine.
It's crazy. I got so sick. I was good at it because basically, okay, think about it. This is my third practice within 3 years. About 3 years. 2 years. And what's the young guy do? He does all the grunt work. So I'm in my third practice, the third time being a grunt. And I wasn't overly thrilled about it, because that's all I did. I think they hired me because they had a diarrhea epidemic the year before, and they needed somebody to give fluids on the farms. And so, but that entire first year was tube worming horses. In hindsight, it was the biggest mistake we've ever made. We tube wormed every horse every 30 days. Talk about resistance. How crazy was that? But we didn't know any better at the time. But I'm talking every horse. And it was interesting thinking back. A lot of young veterinarians would go with me on tube worming days. And it was so funny. I used to take Dr. Rood's assistant, Kim Cameron was her name, and we used to wear sweaters and clothing the same color of the tube worming medicine because you get it all over you.
Yeah.
Like omnazole and piperazine day was like more pinkish type, reddish type. Strongyte, of course, is yellow. So you'd always wear something that wouldn't stain terribly. So that it was funny. But a lot of young veterinarians would come in and I'd be tube worming yearlings, and they could be a little salty.
Yeah, tell the truth. There's had to be some horses out there that never got dewormed.
If there were, I don't recall.
There's some that are tough.
There had to be, but I don't recall. We Bart, you know as well as I do. I came from cowboy country.
Yeah.
We got them done. I mean, they were in Hot Springs when we tube wormed. The horses had never been touched, ever. They ran the yearlings up into a cattle chute, and Carl, I remember him well, had a twitch. He'd put them on their ear, with a rubber handle, and he'd pull their noses up, and I'd run the tube down their nose in the chute, in the alleyway of the chute. That's how I learned how to tube worm. Pretty crazy. So, yeah, it was a challenge, but I was a bit of a cowboy. In fact, John Williams, I got stories about him. John Williams, that's what his nickname. He called me cowboy, and I was far from a cowboy. But that was the last time I had a rope. I've told you this story.
Yeah.
I used to have a rope in my truck. Every self-respecting veterinarian would have a rope in their truck. Well, the one time I went up to, and this is when you're in trouble. I went up to this farm. This was in Hot Springs. Went to this farm, and they had 2 colts to castrate. They said, so I pulled up. If there's a crowd of people, it's a bad sign.
The neighbors show up too.
Everybody's there. And that if there's brand new shiny halters on the ground with the tag still on them, bad sign.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I pull up and they go, that's Dr. Pierce, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, we need to castrate these 2 colts. And I said, have these colts ever been touched or caught? And they go, no, sir, no. And I go, was anybody here a cowboy? And he goes, no, you're the closest thing to a cowboy that's here. I said, well, I'm not a cowboy, but I've got a rope. And so we ran them in the barn, boom, missed one, and then ran him up there again, boom, snagged him and was dallying around the fence post. And all of a sudden that rope goes zzz, right around that rope, and the horse runs through 2 fences over the hill with my rope attached to it. And I go, okay, that's the last time I had a rope in my car or truck. And sure enough, I said, when I was just kidding, I said, whenever you can snub these up to a tree or something, I'll come back and castrate them. I was thinking just snub them up to a post and fence or barn or whatever. Sure enough, 6 months later, they called me, had them snubbed up against a tree, castrated them both. But, I've got a million stories, but that's not really why we're here.
So is it just Bill Rood and Tom Riddle when you came?
Yeah, basically, Tom had joined in 81. Bill had hired him in 81, and then I came along in 84. There was another associate, Larry Olson, that left, had some personal problems, issues in his life, and he left shortly after I arrived. So it was basically just the 3 of us. I remember the first day I walked. We sent all of our cases to Haggard's. All of our cases. I got to scrub in on surgeries up there. With Thorpe or Spirito. Sent everything up there. Sent our foals to Larry Beyer. No,
Doug
Beyer. And one day we had office buildings, a garage office building there in Nandino by the post office. One day I pulled in and I saw Rood and his terrible penmanship drawing on a legal pad like of a architectural drawing. I go, what are you doing? He goes, we're thinking about building a hospital. Oh, that's pretty cool. I love it. Being a young vet. So it was fun to watch that the whole thing develop from picking the land to breaking ground. And, I've been here for it all. So, and also they were looking for a first surgeon. I remember, they hired Tim Cudd from Woodford to do foals. He had a really strong interest in neonatology. That was kind of the buzz at the time. He stayed here for a couple years, but I remember, I guess it was Cudd. Cudd and I went to Chicago, and we actually interviewed Embertson for the job. It was awesome. And Claire was there. I imagine it was much of an interview, but he probably thought, where am I going? And Yahoo from Missouri going there. So yeah, I've been here since basically day one. It's been a interesting run.
So we know Riddle was driving an El Camino. Rood was driving the Lincoln. What'd you drive?
No, they both drove. Everybody in town drove Caprices, Chevy Caprices.
Yeah,
that's everybody. And I broke the mold. Actually, no, everyone, wore Oxford, blue Oxford shirts and khakis.
Ties? Did you wear a tie?
No, never tie. But a lot of the older vets, Copeland and others wore ties. No, if I had, I wouldn't wear a tie. And then those, what kind of boots were those? The kind of slip-on boot things. I can't remember what they were. But everybody wore that. And like I did too for the longest time, but then I broke out of that and started wearing jeans a little bit. And it was like, Bill would look at me a little funny, like I was breaking the law. But I did get rid of my buckles and hats and all that stuff. I wish I still had those. So they both had Caprices. They had the old, you had to be careful. They had the phones were those Motorola phones that were like party lines. You could listen to everybody, what everybody's saying and stuff. So I basically, Tom was kind of on his own. He did his own thing. I basically, at that time, which people don't really realize, Bill was swamped with work. He was hammered. And so I followed him a lot and did a lot of his backup. And he was the fastest. He was extremely good at mare work. He was fast. And so it was, and then what I have, I bought a car. I had some Pontiac car out of the trunk. And then early on, I bought a Nissan Pathfinder. And it was not a real big car, but I was like going 100 miles an hour sometimes in that thing. But then one day I left it in neutral. It was a 4 or 5 speed. I was at Keeneland and I left it in neutral and just rolled down a little hill and smashed into a muck wagon at Keeneland.
Yeah.
And just peeled everything back. And I go, oh my God, it couldn't have been going over like 20 miles an hour. And I'm going 100 miles an hour in this thing. So I traded that in for a Suburban. I went full.
And you had a pink one at one time.
Yeah,
first day.
No, it wasn't.
I can't tell you what Allsreed said, but he said, "Look for the guy with the pink car."
No,
it was pink.
It was blush.
Let me tell you this story real quick. So, I'm not one to give in, and never have been to give in to peer pressure. Relatively independent, and so I used to lease my vehicles, and I just have the guy bring it. Before I was gone to wherever. I was gone on vacation. Well, I didn't vacation much, but to England or somewhere. I was gone, and he just would line up, bring the truck in, have the box put in it, be set. All I do is get in and go because we were pretty busy at the time. And I went into the garage. The ambulatory garage was up here where the pharmacy is, and I flipped the lights on, and I go, "Are you kidding me? I got a pink truck." And I called him. I said, "You got to take this back." I said, "I'm not driving this thing for 4 or 5 years." And he goes, no, keep it. And so I started driving. I didn't have time. I had to go to work next day. So I was driving around. I got so much crap over that pink truck that I said, you know what? I don't have to give in. I'm not going to give in to their criticism. I'm going to keep this pink truck. And so I did. I kept the pink truck. Wasn't actually pink. It was some fancy name for pink. But
Yeah, my first day of work, I was sitting on my lunchbox. Scott Allsweed. We drove down this road. We're going 100 miles an hour down the road. Branches are bouncing. I thought it was a driveway. It turns out it's Lemons Mill Pike, and I get dropped off in front of the barn there at Viking, and I'm sitting there on my lunchbox, and Allsweed said he'll come get you sooner or later. Sitting there on my lunchbox waiting for him, and Johnny P comes out of the barn, and he says, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm a veterinarian." He goes, "We don't need no vet. We got Scotty P. He's the best veterinarian in the country." He said, "You're not welcome here." I go, "No, that's who I think I'm waiting for." And sure enough, here comes the pink car.
They looked after me, and I remember you smashing your first mirror on your truck.
Yeah.
You know, when these roads are so close together that you kiss mirrors.
Yeah.
Which I've done that a few times.
Yeah.
And I told Bart he arrived. You've arrived now. You've kissed mirrors.
That was scary. That's I think I've done 3 of those now, and it's been a long time. I'm a lot more careful.
So no, it's been a lot of hard work. The original 5 or 6 of us, we worked pretty hard to get this thing off the ground, and made a lot of sacrifices along the way. But it's been worth it. It's been a privilege and a lot of fun to see something, to help build this practice that we have.
Must have been hard to leave all that tube worming behind because you were so good at it. So what's your practice morphed into now?
Well, those years it was primarily broodmares. I did that for 25 years. And actually, in the late 80s, I became interested in sales work in public auctions. And particularly, I became interested in upper airways. I remember like it was yesterday. It was 1988, and there was Narvik had bought a stallion prospect that was going to France, and they wanted to scope it at the time, and I can't remember the horse's name, but it was a decent horse. It was a graded stakes winner, but I don't think it was a grade 1 winner, but a winner of about $800,000 in lesser graded stakes. And I said, okay, and I'd scoped the horse, and it was like pretty much a 2B, and had a real flaccid epiglottis and was displacing, and the horse had just run and I think won. And I had 2 or 3 students with me at the time, and I said, look at this airway, how at the time terrible I thought it was, and this horse is a good horse. So that was my impetus to dig into it, because I needed to know what to base in my opinion on. So that started the process of me looking into researching it. And plus it was the other thing I did the work at TaylorMade for a few years, and I'll tell this story on Frank Taylor. We were just starting. I remember the day when I'd go up to a client at Keeneland and say, I'd like to scope your yearling. He goes, what? You want to scope a yearling? I remember that same question when the foals, what? You want to scope a foal? That's how uncommon it was at that time. I remember Frank and the TaylorMade were selling a yearling out of the mare Irish Cunning. I remember her well. And the horse was paralyzed. And it got kicked back on him, or it didn't sell or something. I don't remember the thing. And Frank came up and said, scope this horse. Scoped it. I said, the horse is paralyzed. He went nuts. He went nuts, cussing me, saying, you veterinarians are going to be the ruination of the industry.
He's still saying that, by the
way. He's probably not all wrong, but anyway, he goes, you're veterinarians. I go, Frank, the horse can't breathe. He's paralyzed. So after doing mare, and actually I got really kind of burned out. Fortunately, I was heading in different directions: sales, upper airways, etc., radiographs, and because everyone that works pretty hard faces burnout at some stage, and I was getting burned out because I was going immediately into a large. At one time, I had 2 or 3 years in a row, I had about 800 mares in my practice, so I was rocking pretty good, pretty busy. And what got me a little bit was, one, the burnout. I'd go straight into a sales practice. So I maybe got the month of December was relatively free, and that was it. So I did that for maybe 20 years. So I basically said, okay, I either have to quit mares, I have to give up something, or I've got to quit practice. And so I decided to transition all my farms away to the younger associates, which was nice at the time because we kept most of them. And I went straight into pretty much full-time sales work. And another thing that got me was when I came here, palpating mares, and for the longest time was an art form. And at that time, you better have a really, really good veterinarian that's palpating your mares, because, you're going to Danzig and Unbridled and Chinsky, et cetera, and, no ultrasounds. We rarely used ultrasounds then, just started. And so it was basically, and what was particularly hairy is breeding mares out of here where there were no teaser, and you'd be sending the mare to Claiborne to Danzig, and you couldn't teaser, so you relied on the speculum a lot. You didn't look for edema on the ultrasound. And so where I'm going with this is that's what kind of got me with the advent of the ultrasound and higher use of that. In my opinion anyway, the art form diminished somewhat, of being able to feel and to palpate and to detect, and so to me mares were less of a challenge, just personally, because I was brought up when it was truly an art form. So that was another reason. Plus, I had way too much work. So I went to sales, and I've been doing them ever since. Published a few papers on upper airways, on young horses. Have really tried to make sense of young horse airways and what it means, and not be a person that makes a guess or try to take as much subjectivity as we could out of it, and put some science to it, which none existed. And we've done fairly well through the years. It's been a life's work doing it, but we've done pretty good shedding light on young horse upper airways.
So let's talk about that just a little bit. What's the biggest surprise you found in doing the studies and putting the numbers to it?
Oh, geez. The biggest surprise. At the time, the biggest surprise was not knowing. Coming in was probably thinking that the 2.2s or the 2B airways were okay. And they're not the end of the world. We can talk about that more. The biggest surprise was, I guess the biggest surprise was probably the subjectivity of not knowing what to call and being overly critical at the time. And I think to this day, vets that are lesser experienced overly criticize airways, because they're one. And I just came back from Tattersall sale, and I was telling a trainer there that, one of the problems is that you have to understand here is that the horses you're looking at are 3-4 years old, and you're taking that criteria of those mature adult airways, and you're pushing them into babies. And so there's a difference there. You have to look at it differently. You have to call them differently. So the biggest surprise would be I guess it wasn't overly a surprise because we didn't know, but the lack of knowledge, the lack of how to call them, because we really didn't know. There wasn't a surprise about the grade 3 airways. I was a little surprised that, the epiglottises, how flaccid they could be and do well. I wasn't surprised, I guess, that the grade 1 and 2As are the same. But we've come full circle. I mean, I can tell a pretty good story on where we are currently on airways. One, and I'll just run through it real quick. I gave a talk on a panel the other day at the CVA meeting and kind of went through stuff of the current Pierce knowledge. And one thing you have to be clear about, and you and I, Bart, call them pretty close. We're pretty close. But there's a lot of discrepancy amongst examiners. And so my research, you basically have to remind everyone continually is that's my 2A, or that's my 2-1, or that's my 2B, not yours, because some people might call this differently. So the first study we did showed, it was a study that Rolf and I gave at the AEP. We didn't publish, but I gave it the AEP, and it was 800 some odd horses, and it showed no significant difference between 1s, 2As, 2Bs. 3s, I think there were. And then I said, well, I don't believe that. But I remember everybody in the industry, after I gave that paper, they were all high. It doesn't matter if you buy 2B, buy 2B. No problem, no big deal. So then there was a 3,000 horse study that, if any, you all know how hard it is to get published, and I'm not the publishing type, so I gave it to Katie Garrett, and she was nice enough to put it together for JAVMA and get it published for me, or for us. It was about 3,000 horses. What started to come out in those 3,000 horses, that the 1s and 2As were good, but then at 4, at 3, at the 2Bs, you started seeing some things in lesser earnings, lesser average earnings per start, etc. At 3, it was almost significant. At 4, it was significant. So you started seeing some significance that the 2B group were lesser horses. So fast forwarded on, I was getting ready to do another study. The one that we have pending now at EVJ is on 2-year-olds, because a question when I lectured, gave talks a couple times in England and Ireland last year, or a few years ago, I get asked, well, do 2Bs run shorter distances? I go, why in the world didn't I look at that before? Anecdotally, you would think, yes. So we Dr. Bross down in Florida, Jose, is putting together, along with Bridget Ratcliffe, one of his interns, the paper on the 2-year-olds. Were about 1,700 or 700 2-year-olds are examined, and the 2A group were the superstars by far, even over the grade 1s. But there was a significant difference between, like, your 2A group, your average earnings 2 to 4 of age, 2 racing years 2, 3, and 4. In your 2A group was 135,000. In your 2B group was about 65,000. What was interesting is your 1s and 2A group ran a furlong further than the 2B group. So nobody's ever published that before. We're trying to get that in print. Got some kickback on stats from EVJ, which I guess isn't uncommon. So we're putting that back in to resubmit it. And I was talking at this meeting the other day at CVA, and they want to know numbers. I said, well, you want to know numbers. There's, what do I tell clients? They want to know what I tell clients. So I said, well, you're not likely, I've never had a classic horse with a 2B airway. Never. I've never, the only horse in that 700 2-year-old study there was one horse that won a sprint at 4, grade 1 at 4. So can you get a grade 1 winner with a 2B airway? Sure you can. No classic winners. I don't recall any Breeders' Cup winners. So the odds of getting a graded stakes winner of a classic horse is not great. But there are a lot of horses that win listed stakes, maybe some grade 3s, et cetera, in the 2B group, and you can get some value with those horses. The latest study, that's being put together, is looking at, this was another question I would have, is that do more 2Bs get tiebacks? And that's the paper we're working on now. Rolf has put together a paper, or we've put together a paper, and we've scanned the Rood Riddle archives, and actually Madison down in Florida is participating too. to get the numbers. And we're looking at horses that have had tiebacks that I examined as a yearling, and we've come up to about 200 of them. So I think that will be interesting to see what, and that's kind of the closure. That's my swan song paper, I think. We've pretty much shown what things mean in the upper airways in a young horse, and that'll pretty much end it.
So what does the future hold for Scott Pierce?
Well, if you knew my dad, which Bart did, retire is not in our vocabulary. Now, that's not to say that I'm not going to practice. Next year will be 39 years. That's getting to be about enough. And that would be it from a practice standpoint. And I've one of my good friends and best clients, Mike Ryan, and he asked me in England this last week, can you give me 3 more years? And I go, I don't know. I don't know if I can do that, but I'll try. But I might just cut back and do just some sales work for a couple private people like him after next year. But it's I figured, I told Debbie, I said, I'm like General MacArthur a little bit. Old soldiers never die; they just fade away. It's West Point discussion. So, and like I told you, Bart, it's been I got my picture. I was at Tattersall's, and somebody tweeted me that they took my picture and then posted it on their Tattersall's webpage. And they all thought that was cool. And I said, well, you don't know me very well. I've always wanted to stay below the radar. I've never been one to seek glory or anything like that. I've always been one to stay below the radar screen.
Yeah, so it's I don't know if you know this, Scott Pierce, MRCVS.
Yeah, I'm licensed there. So I thought 20 years ago I would never use it, and I've been over there. I went over there a couple times for Ted Vout to scope and read his X-rays, and I thought I'd never use it again, and I've been over there 5 years. So,
is there a significant difference between the sales there and sales here?
No, the grounds are different. You better have your walking shoes on there. A lot of hills, a lot of rain. You need your wellies and stuff over there. Now you can't walk a lot in wellies. The auctioneers are different. The horses are a little bit more raw, which is kind of refreshing, actually.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, they're a little raw, a little tougher to examine. That's why you take the young legs like Dr. Bross with you to get in there and wrestle those horses. All in all, it's just an auction. It was interesting. This group's had success bringing those horses back here, and primarily through Chad Brown as the trainer, and they've had some pretty remarkable success. And so they're going to continue to do it. They did this year, bought quite a few horses. And because of associated with that group buying the Tattersalls, is the admin, the reception were phenomenal, taking care of all of our. I've never seen anything like it in any sales company. They were phenomenal, taking care of all the stuff we need, or arranging our COVID tests and getting cars for us and anything you'd want. Just my hat's off to the Tattersall's reception personnel. They were awesome. But a good sale. Sale's a sale. I remember cutting my teeth on cattle sales. I was raised around an auction yard.
Yeah.
So when I came here and I heard the auctioneer, even though it was like $1 million horses, that didn't really, a lot of people excites, they hear it for the first time. I was raised with an auctioneer. The sales didn't really excite me that much. The numbers were pretty interesting, and how in the world do people spend that kind of money? And then I started Wichita Equine was in business for a couple of years. That was my first smaller. That was a big account at the time. I remember they bought. I was here 6 months, maybe 8 months, and Mike Helmbrick was managing. He left TaylorMade, and they bought Princess Rooney for $5.5 million. That was in 1980. She won the 86, I think the first distaff. And she was bred to Danzig, and he paid, it's either $5.5 million for her. And I remember waiting on the press. I had to wait 45 minutes for that mare to leave. And I was a pretty accomplished, repro vet at the time, because I'd done a lot of repro, and this was my third practice. I remember reaching into her for $5.5 million. I'm thinking, no ultrasound. So I knew she was pregnant, positional of the ovaries, blah, blah, blah. But I couldn't blot that fetus. And I go, there is no way so I just tried again. So finally, I had to go get the old bull, Bill Rood, which didn't break my heart at all. I said, here, run your arm in this mare. I know she's pregnant, but I couldn't feel a fetus. He said, she's fine. And really that kind of underscores this practice in general, that there's a lot of very, very good veterinarians in this system, in this practice. And the humility is pretty, if I was some gunner, it would maybe make me look bad that I couldn't do it. But there's never been an issue with most anyone that's in this practice that, hey, get somebody else to do it if you can't. And the goal is to provide the best service. And that was my goal coming out of vet school. I wanted to be the best equine veterinarian I could be, the best in the country. That was my goal. And I certainly didn't achieve that, but I went a fair ways, I think, on establishing what I thought were some good things. So it was all good. Then my first intern, Bart Barber, he was terrible. What a challenge. He was such a hard guy to teach things.
Yeah, but he turned it around.
Yeah, he turned it around finally. I've had a lot of great interns, and my legacy here is more that the ones I'll leave behind, the 7 or 8 interns that I've had that are in this practice currently. Kind of like kids a little bit. At the time, I was pretty rough on them. I was pretty tough. I remember Kim Abernathy. She's in Western Kentucky now. And I called the ultrasound a crutch. I mean, it is a crutch. You don't need that damn thing. And so I wouldn't let them touch an ultrasound until they would get 20 palpations correct. And I was the judge and jury and everything. So I remember Kim got to she was at 19, and she had to get to 20 before I would let her use the ultrasound. And she missed a 45-day bulge was in the right horn. She called the left horn. Because how sometimes the horns will peel out, tuck them around. She missed it. I said, back to 1. She started crying. I felt terrible, but I made her go back to 1, and she did get to 20. Brady Bergen, he was a challenge. All Swede. He's technically not my first intern, but he was the first one. He was very much a challenge. There's the great ones are like, I knew Jeff Cook. Jeff Cook, you never heard a peep. He'd be down at the end, do it, suture and mare. You never hear a peep out of him. I said, he's a keeper. You don't hear a word out of him. Lori Metcalf, same way. She was such a sweetheart, is such a sweetheart. Just so many interns. And it's been a fun ride. Any other stories you want me to tell about Bart?
No, I did. I did break his scope one time at Keeneland. I was surprised that didn't come up. Brand new $20,000 scope.
Yeah. And he denied it.
I didn't deny it. I just didn't tell you. I just handed it off and hope.
Right.
I go, dang, what did you do to that?
He broke about 30 fibers on it. I looked through it and I go, what did you do? It was a brand new scope. So note to self, don't buy new stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Especially hand it off the intern.
And don't loan it to Bart Barber by the sound
He was
of it.
on the phone. I was just doing a little work.
Yeah, that's right. The excuses
Full
keep rolling.
slapped it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time. It's been a great walk through your time at Rood Riddle.
You're more than welcome. Enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You bet.
It's and you talked about your mentorship a little bit, and if I'm a child, I still call Dad a lot. And it's still my mentor to this day, and Scott, I appreciate everything you did for me.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it.
Excellent. And that was Stallside with Dr. Scott Pierce. See you next time.
Why the podcast? Rood Riddle Veterinary Pharmacy has a relatively small marketing budget, especially when you compare us with our competitors. I understand that marketing is important, but telling people that you exist and what you do and why your products or services are different is a must. I thought about what makes us unique, and I realized I wanted to give people something of real value. And that's how the podcast idea evolved. I wanted to use the money we had set aside for marketing, not to tell people who we are, but rather to show them, to open up how we do things and give something of value at the same time. The content of this podcast is designed to do exactly that. It's not going to serve as a shameless plug for pharmacy products or services. We want you to know who we are, that quality is uncompromised, that we care about people and their animals. If there are specific topics that you would like us to cover or guests that you would like to hear from, please email us at stallside@rrvp.com. Hope you enjoy the show. Just one more note, nothing that we talk about here today should be construed as veterinary advice. That's why you have a relationship with your own veterinarian. Thank you for listening.